At my brother's wedding, my father publicly humiliated me, calling me an uneducated spinster good only for my money. So, I took the microphone, canceled my six-figure gift, and set a trap that left my entire entitled family utterly destitute. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The heavy, rhythmic thrum of the humidifier was the only sound in my bedroom, a stark contrast to the chaotic fever dreams that had been plaguing me for 3 days. At 36, I had built a massive, multi-million-dollar logistics company from the ground up, navigating supply chain collapses and corporate sabotage with a steely resolve. But a severe bout of pneumonia had reduced me to a shivering, fragile mess, confined to my bed, coughing until my ribs felt like shattered glass. I was incredibly vulnerable, physically drained, and emotionally exhausted from the sheer output of my daily life. It was in this weakened, solitary state that my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached out with a trembling hand, the IV port from my recent hospital stint still bruised on my wrist. It was a voicemail. A missed call from my brother, Brandon. He was 32, the golden child of our family, the aspiring artist whose grand visions were entirely funded by my silent, steady bank transfers. Assuming it was a message checking in on my health, or perhaps a panicked question about the seating chart for his upcoming wedding, I pressed play and brought the speaker to my ear. It was not a message meant for me. It was a pocket dial, a digital window into a conversation that was never supposed to reach my ears. First, I heard the clinking of heavy crystal glasses, followed by the booming, arrogant laugh of my father, Victor. Even at 62, retired from middle management and desperate to maintain the illusion of high society, his voice carried that familiar tone of pompous superiority. "I'm just saying, Brandon," Victor chuckled, his voice slightly muffled by the rustling of fabric in a pocket. "Just make sure Sophia signs that final check for the caterer before she croaks from whatever bug she caught. We cannot have a cash bar at this wedding. It would be an absolute embarrassment to our reputation." I stopped breathing. The coughing urge vanished, replaced by a sudden, icy stillness. Then, Brandon's voice filtered through the speaker, light, breezy, and utterly devoid of concern. "Relax, Dad. She'll sign it. Sophia is so desperate to feel like she's actually part of a real family that she'll pay whatever we ask just to be included in the photos. It's what she does." A third voice chimed in. It was Lydia, Brandon's 30-year-old fiancée. Her tone was sharp, calculating, and dripping with disdain. "Exactly. Honestly, her money is the only useful thing about her anyway. No college degree, no husband, no social grace, just a sad, bloated bank account for us to use. Once the wedding is done, we really need to distance ourselves. She's terribly off-brand for our new life." Victor laughed again, a hearty, roaring sound that echoed in the silence of my sick room. "Cheers to that, Lydia. She's not family, she's an ATM." The recording clicked off, plunging my room back into the monotonous hum of the humidifier. I lay there in the dim light, my heart pounding a slow, agonizing rhythm against my bruised ribs. I had sacrificed my youth, my education, and my personal life to ensure they never went without. I had paid off Victor's debts to save his pride. I had financed Brandon's endless string of failed artistic endeavors to keep his dreams alive. And this was the truth of how they saw me. A sad, uneducated wallet. The betrayal cut deeper than the illness ever could. The physical toll of the pneumonia felt insignificant the next morning compared to the hollow, aching void in my chest. I dragged myself out of bed, the fever having finally broken, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I sat in my expansive living room, wrapped in a thick blanket, sipping lukewarm tea when the front door chimed. I had given Brandon a key years ago, a symbol of my absolute trust and open-door policy for my little brother. He didn't even knock. Brandon strode into the foyer, his designer shoes, which I had paid for, clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. He looked vibrant, healthy, and completely self-absorbed. He didn't bring soup. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't even ask how I was feeling. Instead, he carried a thick manila folder tucked under his arm. "Hey, Soph," he said casually, barely glancing my way as he walked into the kitchen to grab a bottle of sparkling water from my fridge. Ook a little pale, still fighting off that cold. "It's pneumonia, Brandon," I said, my voice raspy and weak. "I was in the hospital." Right, pneumonia." He waved a dismissive hand, walking over to where I sat and dropping the heavy manila folder directly onto my lap. "Look, I know you're under the weather, but Lydia is absolutely freaking out. The florist is demanding the final deposit by 5 o'clock today, and the string quartet wants their retainer. I need you to wire the funds, like, right now." I stared down at the folder. Inside were invoices totaling over $60,000. This was on top of the initial deposits I had already paid. I looked up at my brother's face. There was no worry for my health in his eyes. There was only the impatient, entitled expectation of a spoiled child waiting for his allowance. $60,000, Brandon," I whispered, testing the waters, searching his face for even a flicker of guilt after the horrific conversation I had overheard the night before. "That is an enormous amount of money. I'm quite sick right now. Can this wait until tomorrow?" Brandon sighed heavily, an exaggerated sound of profound inconvenience. He leaned against the back of the sofa, crossing his arms. "Sophia, please, don't make this difficult. Lydia is incredibly stressed, and Dad is already fielding calls from the country club about the final head count. You promised you'd handle the wedding. Just log into your banking portal and send it. It will take you 2 minutes." He spoke to me not as a sister, but as an administrative assistant. The sheer audacity of his coldness was breathtaking. I felt a slow, unfamiliar warmth begin to rise from the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the fever returning. It was pure, unadulterated rage. I looked at this man, my flesh and blood, whom I had shielded from every hardship the world had to offer, and realized I had created a monster of entitlement. "I see," I said softly, carefully closing the manila folder. I kept my face entirely neutral, masking the storm brewing behind my eyes. "Leave the folder here, Brandon. I will take care of the financial arrangements before the wedding." "Thanks, Soph," he said, instantly brightening, his goal achieved. He checked his luxury watch, my Christmas gift to him 2 years prior. "I gotta run. Cake tasting with Lydia. Feel better, okay?" He walked out of my house without a second backward glance, letting the heavy front door slam shut behind him. I sat in the silence, my hands resting on the folder of demands. They thought I was foolish. They thought my love for them made me blind, deaf, and infinitely compliant. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the magnitude of their mistake, one had to understand our history. When I was 20 years old and halfway through my sophomore year of college, Victor was unceremoniously fired from his mid-level management job due to his own arrogance and inability to adapt to new software. Rather than downsize, my father threw a spectacular tantrum, refusing to take a lesser position. Our family was on the brink of losing everything. So I made a choice. I dropped out of college, much to Victor's performative horror, and took a grueling entry-level job at a shipping warehouse. I worked 80-hour weeks, learned the logistics industry from the inside out, and eventually launched my own brokering firm. I saved the family home. I paid for the groceries. I paid for Brandon's expensive private art school because Victor insisted his son was a creative genius who shouldn't be burdened with student loans. Over the years, the family narrative twisted. Victor began telling his golf buddies that I was simply too impatient and greedy to finish my education, casting my sacrifice as a character flaw. I became the uneducated workaholic, while Brandon became the sophisticated, cultured pride of the family. I accepted the role of the quiet financier because I believed that family was supposed to support one another unconditionally. Then came Lydia. Brandon met Lydia a year ago, and she immediately accelerated the toxic dynamics of my family. Lydia was 30, flawlessly groomed, and fiercely ambitious in the empty arena of social media. She claimed to be a digital wellness curator, a profession that seemed to involve taking heavily filtered photos in expensive hotels and contributing absolutely nothing to society. From the moment Lydia realized the extent of my wealth, she viewed me as an obstacle to her ultimate goal, securing my assets for herself and Brandon. I vividly remembered a dinner party 3 months ago at my home. I had prepared a beautiful meal, trying to bond with my future sister-in-law. Lydia had walked through my home, running her impeccably manicured fingers over my artwork and furniture with the assessing eye of an appraiser. When we sat down to eat, she didn't ask about my business, my day, or my life. She asked about my legal documents. "So, Sophia," Lydia had said, twirling a piece of asparagus on her fork, her eyes cold and calculating. "Brandon mentioned that you hold the deed to your parents' house. That seems so messy. Wouldn't it be better to transfer it fully into Victor's name? Or better yet, into a family trust that Brandon controls? You know, for tax purposes. You wouldn't want the government taking your hard-earned money if, heaven forbid, something happened to you." She had smiled a sweet, entirely venomous smile. She wasn't making polite conversation. She was probing my defenses. She was mapping out the borders of my empire, trying to find the easiest way to invade and conquer. She viewed my lack of a husband and children not as a personal choice, but as a structural weakness she could exploit. She and Victor had fed Brandon's worst impulses, convincing him that my money was not a gift to be cherished, but a birthright to be claimed. As I sat on my sofa, recovering from pneumonia with the wedding invoices in my lap, the pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating clarity. They didn't just want a free wedding. They wanted to bleed me dry and then discard the empty husk. They had planned my financial execution, entirely unaware that the executioner they had chosen was the one holding all the power. The manila folder full of wedding invoices remained untouched on my coffee table for exactly 2 hours. During that time, the shock that had paralyzed me slowly mutated into a cold, hyper-focused clarity. I pushed myself off the sofa, my legs trembling slightly from the lingering weakness of the pneumonia, and walked down the long, quiet hallway to my home office. The room was a testament to my life's work, lined with heavy mahogany bookshelves, multiple monitors displaying global shipping routes, and the framed first dollar my logistics company had ever earned. I bypassed it all and went straight for the large, fireproof safe bolted to the floor in the corner. I spun the heavy metal dial, the familiar clicks echoing in the silent room. Click, click, clack. The heavy door swung open, revealing rows of meticulously organized files. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out 3 specific, thick red folders. I carried them to my massive oak desk, turned on the brass banker's lamp, and sat down. I opened the first folder. It was the deed to the sprawling, 4-bedroom colonial house where Victor currently lived. He loved to host neighborhood association meetings there, parading around as the master of the manor, boasting about his early, successful retirement. He carefully omitted the fact that his name was nowhere on the property documentation. 10 years ago, when the bank was days away from foreclosing on him due to his reckless spending and lack of income, I had stepped in. I didn't just pay the mortgage. I bought the house outright under a shell LLC that I entirely controlled. He was, legally speaking, my month-to-month tenant living there rent-free. I opened the second folder. It contained the master lease agreement for Brandon's luxury, floor-to-ceiling windowed loft in the city's trendy arts district. Brandon told all of his friends that his art sales funded his lifestyle. The lease, however, was co-signed by me, and the $6,000 monthly rent was automatically drafted from my primary corporate account. If I pulled my authorization, he would be evicted in 30 days. I opened the third folder. This was the wedding file. I had agreed to gift them $100,000 for the wedding of their dreams. But because neither Brandon nor Lydia had the credit scores to secure the prestigious venues and high-end vendors, I had personally signed the vendor contracts. The deposits had been paid on my American Express Black Card. I was the sole point of contact for the catering, the floral arrangements, the venue, and the entertainment. They thought my money was a boundless, untethered resource they could simply tap into at will. They didn't realize that I didn't just write checks. I owned the infrastructure of their entire lives. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line of my corporate attorney, a razor-sharp bulldog of a man named Harrison. "Sophia," Harrison's deep voice boomed through the speaker. "I thought you were on bed rest. If you're calling about the Tokyo shipment, I already told operations to handle it." "This isn't about the Tokyo shipment, Harrison," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of the raspy weakness from earlier. "This is personal. I need you to do two things for me immediately." "I'm listening," he said, his tone instantly shifting from casual to professional. He knew that tone of voice. It was the voice I used when a competitor tried to undercut my contracts. "First, I need you to review the ownership structure of the LLC holding the residential property on Elm Street and the lease guarantees for the downtown loft. I want to ensure there are absolutely no loopholes that would prevent me from terminating both agreements at a moment's notice." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on his end. "Done. I set those up myself, Sophia. They are airtight. You can pull the plug whenever you want. What's the second thing?" "I need you to contact that private investigator firm we used for the background checks on the warehouse managers last year. I need a full, deep-dive financial and personal background check on a woman named Lydia. She claims to be a digital wellness curator. I want everything: tax returns, credit card debt, civil suits, past relationships, everything. And I need a secondary check on my father, Victor. I want to know exactly what he's been doing with the allowance I give him every month." There was a brief pause on the line. Harrison had been my attorney for 8 years. He knew my family dynamic. He knew I had always protected them. "Sophia," Harrison said gently, "are you absolutely sure about this? Once you open this door, you can't unsee what's inside." "I've already seen enough, Harrison," I replied, my eyes locked on the deed to my father's house. "Just get it done. I need the information before Saturday." Saturday was the wedding. Over the next 48 hours, I transformed my grief into a weapon. I forced myself to eat, to rest, to regain my physical strength. I drank gallons of water and took my antibiotics with militant precision. The cough subsided. The fever vanished. I was no longer the sickly, pathetic woman they had laughed at on the voicemail. I was the CEO of my own life, preparing for a hostile takeover. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Brandon. I let it ring 3 times before answering, ensuring my voice sounded perfectly normal, perhaps even a little weary, playing the part they expected. "Hey, Soph," Brandon said, the background noise of a busy cafe bleeding through the line. "Lydia and I are at that little French bistro near your house. We need to go over the final seating chart and, sort out those invoices from the other day. You feeling up for a quick lunch?" "I'll be right there," I said, hanging up before he could respond. I dressed carefully. I didn't wear the oversized sweatpants they were accustomed to seeing me in on weekends. I wore a tailored, charcoal gray pantsuit, the kind I wore to board meetings. I applied my makeup meticulously, erasing the dark circles the pneumonia had left behind. I looked sharp, wealthy, and entirely in control. When I walked into the bistro, Brandon and Lydia were sitting in a corner booth. Lydia was busy taking photos of her untouched latte from 5 different angles, completely ignoring Brandon, who was mindlessly scrolling through his phone. I approached the table and slid into the chair opposite them. Brandon looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as he took in my appearance. "Wow, you look intense, feeling better." "Much better," I said smoothly, folding my hands on the table. "You wanted to discuss the invoices." Lydia finally put her phone down, offering me a tight, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sophia, so glad you could make it. Yes, the vendors are being incredibly aggressive. It's so tacky of them to demand payment this close to the big day. But you know how these working-class service people are. If you could just write the check right now, I can run it over to them." She reached into her designer handbag and slid a fresh manila folder across the table. tapping it with a perfectly manicured, acrylic fingernail. I didn't look at the folder. I kept my eyes locked on Lydia. "I've reviewed the invoices, Lydia. The total is significantly higher than we initially discussed, but that's not what I want to talk about today." Lydia's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, what is it then?" "I want to talk about the house," I said, my voice low and conversational, yet carrying enough weight to make Brandon shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Victor's house, the one I own." Brandon frowned. "What about it? Dad said you were looking into putting it into a family trust after the wedding. So it's, protected for all of us." "That was your father's suggestion, yes," I said, turning my gaze to my brother. "But I've been doing some estate planning while I was sick, and I've decided against it. The house will remain solely in my LLC. Furthermore, I've scheduled a professional appraisal for next Tuesday. I'm considering selling it." The silence at the table was profound. The ambient chatter of the bistro seemed to fade away. Brandon stared at me, his mouth slightly open, unable to process the words. Lydia, however, reacted instantly. The artificial sweetness vanished, replaced by a sharp, panicked fury. Her posture stiffened, and she leaned across the table, her voice dropping to an angry hiss. "Are you insane?" Lydia snapped, glancing around nervously to ensure no one was listening. "You can't sell that house. Victor lives there. And frankly, Brandon and I were planning on moving in there to start our family once Victor downsizes. It's family property." "It is not family property, Lydia," I corrected her, my tone remaining entirely level. "It is my property. I paid off the foreclosure. I pay the property taxes. I pay for the landscaping. It is an asset in my portfolio." "You are incredibly selfish," Lydia hissed, her face flushing red. The mask had completely slipped. She was no longer the polite future sister-in-law. She was a cornered animal realizing her prize was being pulled away. "Brandon has a right to that house. He's the son. What are you going to do with it? Sit in it all alone with your money? You have no husband, no kids. You're ruining Brandon's future out of spite." Brandon finally found his voice. "Soph, what is going on with you? Why are you doing this now? Dad is going to have a heart attack." "I am simply securing my assets, Brandon," I said, standing up from the table. I didn't touch the folder of invoices. I looked down at the two of them, seeing them clearly for the parasites they were. "I suggest you tell Victor about the appraisal. He should probably start looking at smaller apartments." As I turned to walk away, Lydia grabbed her phone and desperately dialed Victor. Before I even reached the door of the bistro, I heard Victor's booming voice on speakerphone, practically vibrating the glass windows. "She said what?" Victor screamed through the phone. "Put that ungrateful, selfish spinster on the line right now. I'll tell her exactly what I think of her little power trip. She is nothing without this family." I pushed open the door and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. Their panic was palpable, and I hadn't even started on the wedding yet. The following morning, less than 24 hours before the rehearsal dinner, I was sitting at my desk when the secure email from Harrison arrived. The subject line simply read, "Pi report subject, L and V." I clicked the encrypted link, entered my password, and downloaded the massive PDF file. I spent the next 3 hours reading every single page, my disgust growing with every paragraph. The investigator had done an exceptionally thorough job. Lydia's digital wellness curator business was entirely fictitious. She hadn't filed a tax return with actual revenue in 4 years. What she did have, however, was $85,000 in high-interest credit card debt spread across 7 different cards, all maxed out on luxury clothing, vacations, and fine dining. Worse, the report detailed 2 previous civil lawsuits filed against Lydia by former fiancés. In both cases, she had broken off the engagement weeks before the wedding, refusing to return the expensive rings and completely draining joint bank accounts they had set up for wedding expenses. She wasn't just materialistic, she was a professional grifter. She had targeted Brandon because he portrayed an image of immense wealth, completely unaware that his wealth was entirely subsidized by his quiet, uneducated sister. The section on Victor was equally nauseating. For the past 3 years, my father had been quietly taking out high-interest title loans against his classic car collection, cars that I had paid to restore. He was drowning in debt again, living far beyond his means at the country club, buying rounds of top-shelf liquor for men who secretly laughed at him. He was banking heavily on my eventual death, or his ability to manipulate me into signing over my entire estate into a trust he could control. The picture was complete. They were bankrupt in every sense of the word, financially, morally, and emotionally. I picked up my phone and sent a text message to Brandon. "Come to my office. Now, come alone or don't come at all." He arrived 40 minutes later, looking frantic and exhausted. He paced in front of my desk, running his hands through his hair. "Sophia, Dad is losing his mind," Brandon started immediately, not even sitting down. "He didn't sleep at all last night. He's talking about suing you for squatters' rights or something crazy. And Lydia has been crying nonstop. You have to fix this. You have to call them and tell them you were just stressed from being sick and you didn't mean it." I sat silently in my leather chair, watching him. I loved my brother. I had changed his diapers. I had paid for his first car. I had attended every single one of his terrible art gallery showings when Victor couldn't be bothered. Seeing him so deeply manipulated, so desperately defending the very people who were using him, shattered the last remaining piece of my heart. I slid a thick, bound document across the polished wood of my desk. I had redacted the most sensitive financial account numbers, but left the undeniable proof visible. "Sit down, Brandon," I commanded, my voice echoing with authority, "and read this." He stopped pacing, looking. NG suspiciously at the document. "What is that?" "It is a comprehensive background check on the woman you are marrying tomorrow," I said bluntly, "and a financial audit of your father." Brandon's face contorted in anger. He didn't reach for the folder. "You investigated my fiancé? Are you psychotic? Sophia, this is out of line, even for you. You can't just throw your money around to spy on people." "Open the folder, Brandon," I warned, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Look at page 4. Look at the civil suits from the 2 men she was engaged to before you. Read the testimonies where she stole their joint savings." Brandon hesitated, then snatched the folder off the desk. He flipped to the designated page. I watched his eyes scan the text. For a brief second, I saw genuine shock register on his face. He saw the court docket numbers. He saw the exact amounts of money she had taken. But then, the defensive walls of deep, pathological denial slammed back up. He slammed the folder shut and threw it back onto my desk. "This is garbage," Brandon yelled, his voice cracking. "This is manipulated. You probably paid someone to write this just to sabotage me because you're lonely and bitter." "Brandon," I said softly, the sorrow finally breaking through my cold facade. "She is $70,000 in debt. She has no business. She is marrying you because she thinks you have access to my accounts. She thinks I am going to die of stress and leave it all to you." "She had a hard past," Brandon screamed, leaning over my desk, his face red with irrational fury. "You wouldn't understand. You've never been in love. You sit in this dark office surrounded by shipping manifests, pretending you're better than everyone else because you have a bank account. You don't have a husband. You don't have a real life. You're just jealous that I'm actually happy." He backed away, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Dad is right about you. You're cold, you're uneducated, and you're not a real part of this family. Don't bother coming to the wedding tomorrow. We don't want your toxic energy there." He turned and stormed out of my office, slamming the heavy door behind him with such force that the framed first dollar on my wall rattled against the glass. I sat alone in the silence of my office. My own brother had looked at irrefutable proof of a scam and chose the scammer. He had chosen the abuser. He had chosen the lie. I closed the pie report and placed it neatly in my drawer. All the sorrow, all the lingering guilt, evaporated completely. Brandon had made his choice. My father had made his choice. Lydia had made her choice. They wanted me to be nothing but a wallet. Tomorrow, at the wedding, I would show them exactly what happens when the wallet snaps shut permanently. I was explicitly told not to attend, but an uninvited guest who happens to be financing the entire event carries a certain kind of untouchable authority. The wedding reception was held at the Grand Plaza Hotel, a sprawling, historic venue boasting vaulted ceilings, gold leaf moldings, and imported crystal chandeliers. As I walked through the heavy mahogany doors, the sheer scale of the extravagance I had blindly funded hit me like a physical blow. There were massive, towering centerpieces of white orchids on every single table. The string quartet was playing softly in the corner, and waiters in pristine white coats circulated with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I did not wear a traditional bridesmaid dress or anything resembling festive attire. I wore the same tailored, charcoal gray pantsuit I had worn to the bistro, a stark, corporate contrast to the sea of pastels and sequined gowns. I moved silently to the back of the ballroom, standing in the shadows near the towering double doors, watching the spectacle unfold. Brandon and Lydia sat at the sweetheart table on a raised dais. Lydia looked triumphant in a custom-designed, heavily beaded gown that cost more than most people made in a year. Brandon looked exhausted, but was dutifully playing the part of the happy groom, smiling for the continuous flashes of the hired photographers. Then the clinking of glasses began. It was time for the toasts. My father, Victor, practically leaped out of his chair. He strutted to the center of the dance floor, adjusting his rented tuxedo jacket, his face flushed with high-end whiskey and the intoxicating attention of 200 guests. He tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback echoing through the cavernous room. He started with the usual platitudes, praising Brandon's artistic genius and welcoming Lydia into the prestigious family fold. He spoke of legacy, of success, and of the importance of traditional values. And then he couldn't help himself. He had an audience, and he needed a punchline. He locked eyes with his golf buddies at a table near the front, a smug, cruel smile spreading across his face. Now we all know my daughter, Sophia C. Wouldn't be up here today, Victor boomed into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't know I was standing in the back. She's a bit different from the rest of us. She's not married, she's not educated, didn't even finish her sophomore year, if you can believe it. But hey, at least she's good for a check. The crowd roared. The laughter wasn't polite. It was raucous, belly-deep, and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I watched Victor soak it in, grinning from ear to ear, raising his glass to the cheering room. I looked at Brandon. He was staring down at his plate, refusing to meet anyone's eye, but he didn't stop the laughter. He didn't defend me, he simply let it happen. The cold, calculated business executive inside me took over completely. I stepped out of the shadows. The heavy clicking of my heels on the polished marble floor cut through the fading laughter. As I walked down the center aisle toward the dance floor, the guests closest to me began to turn. The whispers started, rippling through the room like a wave. By the time I reached the edge of the dance floor, the ballroom had fallen into a tense, confused silence. Victor saw me. His smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, panicked terror. His hand, holding the microphone, dropped to his side. I didn't yell, I didn't rush. I walked directly up to him, my eyes locked onto his, and calmly took the microphone from his trembling hand. He didn't resist. He couldn't. I turned to face the sea of 200 guests, the silence in the room so profound that the soft hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. I looked at the country club members who had laughed at me. I looked at the extended family who had always viewed me with pity. And then I looked directly at Victor. "You know what, Victor?" I said into the microphone, my voice steady, amplified, and devoid of any emotion. "You're absolutely right. I am not family. I am just your wallet." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. I turned slowly, deliberately, toward the sweetheart table where Lydia and Brandon were sitting frozen in shock. I locked eyes with the bride. "Oh, Lydia," I added, my voice echoing through the silence. And that $100,000 wedding gift I promised? Forget it, it's canceled. You could quite literally hear a fork drop onto a china plate somewhere in the back of the room. The clink rang out like a gunshot. Lydia shot out of her chair, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The careful, curated image of the blushing bride evaporated entirely. "You can't do that," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing without a microphone. "The vendors, the caterer, they haven't been paid the final installments. They'll sue me." "They will certainly try," I replied calmly into the mic. "But they won't be suing me. I canceled my corporate card authorizations an hour ago. All liability falls to the names on the marriage certificate. So, best of luck with that." I didn't stop there. I turned back to the audience. The expansion of the narrative demanded the full truth be laid bare. "Since we are sharing family secrets tonight," I continued, my voice commanding the massive room, "my father, Victor, who loves to boast about his early retirement, does not own a single brick of the house he lives in. I bought it out of foreclosure 10 years ago, I own it. And as of yesterday, he has been served a 30-day notice of eviction. His cars are leveraged with title loans, and his country club dues are paid by my uneducated bank account. The ride is officially over." Victor made a strangled, choking sound, grasping at his chest, his face purple with humiliation. The golf buddies who had just been laughing with him were now staring at him in utter disgust and disbelief. I turned my attention back to the sweetheart table. Brandon was standing now, staring at Lydia with wide, horrified eyes. "And to my beautiful new sister-in-law," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, precise tone, "whom I had thoroughly investigated by a private firm yesterday. Lydia is currently $75,000 in credit card debt. She has no business. Furthermore, this is her third engagement in 4 years. She was sued by the previous 2 fiancés for draining their joint accounts just weeks before the wedding. She thought she had found a bigger payday with my family. She thought my brother had access to my company's assets." Lydia screamed, lunging forward, knocking over a crystal water goblet that shattered across the table. Shut up, you jealous, bitter bitch. Brandon, don't listen to her. She's lying, she's forging documents." But Brandon wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Lydia. He was looking at the sheer panic in her eyes, the frantic, desperate greed that had completely overtaken her features. He remembered the thick, bound file I had slid across my desk. He remembered the civil suit dockets he had refused to read. The illusion finally, irreversibly shattered. "Brandon," I said softly, stepping away from the microphone, my voice carrying just enough for him to hear over Lydia's hysterical screaming. "I am stepping away. If you stay with her, you pay the rent on that luxury loft yourself. You pay for this wedding yourself. I am entirely, permanently done." Brandon looked at his father, who was sputtering and gripping a chair for support. He looked at Lydia, who was currently grabbing her designer purse, frantically pulling out her phone, likely to check her frozen bank accounts. Brandon reached up. With trembling hands, he unpinned the expensive white orchid boutonniere from his tuxedo lapel. He didn't say a single word. He simply let the flower drop to the floor, turned his back on the sweetheart table, and walked down the steps of the dais. He didn't look back. He walked straight down the center aisle, past the staring guests, past my hyperventilating father, and out the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. Lydia let out a piercing, guttural shriek of fury, throwing a silver serving tray onto the floor. I placed the microphone gently on the nearest table, smoothed out my charcoal gray jacket, and walked out the exact same doors. The downfall was as rapid as it was absolute. By Monday morning, the logistics of their ruin were fully in motion. The vendors from the wedding, realizing my American Express was no longer backing the event, descended upon Lydia with brutal efficiency. Because she had signed the final liability waivers in her rush to control the event, she was personally on the hook for nearly $80,000 in unpaid catering, floral, and venue fees. Combined with the evidence from my private investigator, which my attorney happily forwarded to the relevant collections agencies, Lydia was forced to file for immediate bankruptcy. Her carefully curated social media presence vanished overnight, replaced by the harsh reality of processed servers and ruined credit. Victor's descent was even more pathetic. He attempted to hire a lawyer to fight the eviction, claiming squatters' rights and implied familial ownership. Harrison, my corporate bulldog, crushed the frivolous lawsuit in a single afternoon. When Victor realized I was truly not going to save him, his arrogance dissolved into desperate, weeping voicemails, begging for just one more month, just one more loan to save his classic cars. I never answered. I blocked his number. The moving trucks arrived on the 30th day, and Victor was forced to move into a tiny, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. His country club membership permanently revoked for non-payment. I was sitting in my sunlit living room 2 weeks later, drinking coffee and reviewing a massive new shipping contract for a European distributor, when the doorbell rang. I didn't have to look at the security cameras to know who it was. I opened the door to find Brandon standing on the porch. He looked entirely different. The expensive, designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a plain t-shirt. He looked tired, humbled, and deeply ashamed. "I moved out of the loft," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the welcome mat. "I handed the keys to the landlord this morning. I know you canceled the lease guarantee. I didn't want them to have to evict me." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, Brandon." He walked into the foyer, his shoulders slumped. He followed me into the kitchen and sat at the island, wrapping his hands around a mug of coffee I pushed toward him. For a long time, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. "I read the file," Brandon finally whispered, his voice cracking. "After I left the reception, I went to your office. The security guard let me in. I sat at your desk and I read every single page. The lawsuits, the debt, everything you tried to tell me." He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Soph, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. Not just for Lydia, for everything. For letting Dad talk to you like that. For taking your money and acting like I deserved it. For calling you uneducated when you sacrificed your entire future to keep a roof over our heads. I was so blind. I was so entitled. I let them convince me that you were just a resource." I leaned against the counter, looking at the brother I had raised, the brother I had protected to his own detriment. The anger that had fueled my revenge was gone, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a sliver of hope. "I contributed to it, Brandon," I said softly, the truth of the matter hanging in the air. "I made it too easy for you. I thought throwing money at the problem was love. It wasn't. It crippled you." "I got a job," he said, wiping his eyes. "It's nothing glamorous, just an entry-level graphic design gig at a local printing firm, but it pays an hourly wage. And I rented a small studio apartment. And I'm going to pay for it myself. I don't want your money, Sophia. I swear to God, I never want another dime from you. I just want my sister back, if you can ever forgive me." The healing would take time. The damage of the last decade could not be erased in a single afternoon. But as I looked at him, stripped of his entitlement and facing the real world for the very first time, I felt a genuine warmth spread through my chest. "You have your sister, Brandon," I said, offering him a small, authentic smile. "But the wallet is permanently closed." He let out a watery laugh, nodding emphatically. "I know, and I'm glad." Over the next few months, my life transformed. Without the massive, draining financial and emotional burden of my father and the toxic family dynamic, my logistics company experienced unprecedented growth. I expanded into international markets, opening offices in London and Tokyo. I started traveling for pleasure, not just for business. I bought art that I loved, not art that I felt obligated to fund. I had spent my entire adult life building an empire just to hand the keys to people who despised me. Now, the empire was mine alone. I had reclaimed my assets, my dignity, and my peace of mind. The uneducated, unmarried workaholic had set a trap they never saw coming, and in doing so, had finally set herself free.